Here you go, Mac. Let's see that down here.
If Izuku is being honest, and he always tries to be, he's completely unsure of how to explain the situation to All Might and Gran Torino. He has theories, lots of them, and he knows what's a definite fact, but how could he explain that One for All, which barring the imprints and vestiges of the past holders is supposed to be a transferable quirk that builds up power, is alive? The answer is in a flurry of mumbling, vague gestures that could really mean anything, and lots of pointing to the notebook, which is a total mess and can't be deciphered. Gran Torino only puts up with 2 minutes of his nonsense before forcing a cup of strong coffee in his hands and making him think about it for a good 10 minutes. When Izuku's mind is calm and relaxed, but also inversely caffeinated, he's allowed to speak. It's alive. He says, absolutely sure. But you already knew that, right? Across the table, which is a slab of wood supported by cinder blocks, Gran really needs better living conditions, but the man is just too stubborn to accept help and too lazy to buy furniture himself. All Might nods. You did a good job explaining it to me over text. I just needed some time to myself to see if I could find an answer. Did you? Izuku asks, hand itching for a pencil. He's not really sure what he'd write on, though. Gran confiscated his notebook of gibberish a good bit of time ago. I found a partial one. All Might concedes, but I'd like to hear your findings first. It wants to be active and loves breaking things. Izuku begins getting the most important information out first. It can't talk, and I don't think it's of human intelligence, but Five called it a dog, and I think that's a pretty good analogy. All Might stays silent, so Izuku continues, it can't control my body, but it can try to activate parts of itself, like it did at my final exam. And when I use Black Whip, it can manipulate the strands as well. I see. All Might laces his fingers. And can you feel it? The life of One for All. Izuku nods. Always. Right now, it's, well, sleeping is the best way to describe it. Dormant is another good word. I can't passively feel it, but if I concentrate, I can definitely tell it's there. When I actually use One for All, I can, though. It's much more prominent then. All Might nods, bangs, swaying up and down. I think I've felt the same. You have? Izuku asks quickly. Not to the extent you describe. All Might twiddles his thumbs, a faraway look in his eyes, but my mind feels much more quiet now, like I'm missing something or someone. At the very least, I can tell I've only got the embers left and not the entire flame. Sounds like a load of undefined spiritual crap to me. Gran Torino says, breaking his silence. It's alive and in Midoriya now. That's all that matters. Is it going to be a problem? Not at all. Izuku smiles. We sorta have an agreement. I get to use it as much as I want all day, but I have to let it take the reins for at least 2 hours. At least it's going along with that for now. Good enough for me, Gran says, hopping off of his seat. Keep a lid on the thing and don't let it hurt anybody. We don't need you in jail, got it? Got it? Gran takes his leave, heading out to do who knows what at who knows where. All Might, however, remains still. There's more on your mind, he says. Tell me about it. I think it's just Black Whip that's alive. Izuku chews his lip thoughtfully. Five said that it was always kind of alive, and One for All just made it worse, or better. Stronger. Stronger is the right word. That would make sense. All Might thinks out loud. But we've no way to test or prove it. The only way to do so would be to talk to someone who held it before the fifth and, well, he trails off, looking sullen for people he never met or knew but held a close kinship to. Izuku can relate. We only have information on numbers 4 through 7 anyways. All Might looks over to the shelf containing the notebook with information on the past holders. There are more books next to it now, mostly heavy, old tomes on quirks and history. Izuku hums, entranced by the spine of the book. Oh, what the hell? All Might says, standing up and walking over to the shelf. He effortlessly reaches it and pulls the notebook out with a single skinny finger. Wide-eyed, Izuku watches him set it down on the table. Wait, really? The boy asks, mystified. You could get another one any moment. All Might shrugs. Better safe than sorry. Have a look. Izuku does, starting at the front. The first entry is 7 Nana. Hers is long, with 20 pages of events, pictures, and statistics. By all accounts, she was a good hero. She mostly focused on rescue and made a small name for herself with a couple daring saves. But she was also a pretty good fighter, apprehending more than the average number of villains for the day, which was no small feat with all the crime there was pre-All Might. Next is 6. Izuku had known almost nothing about him, which might be by design. He was underground, operating mostly at night and on low-profile cases. 6 was a small man about Izuku's height and with a lithe build. His eyes were a soft purple, and his hair was matte black. There are only 2 pictures of him, the man looking sad and melancholy in both. In the first, he's in full hero gear, which for him was a big full-body coat made of tough-looking material. Underneath were soft-looking shoes and a pair of black pants. He was young, Izuku notes. The man couldn't have been over 29 in his last picture, which is of him in front of a statue and is dated uncomfortably close to the day he died. 6's quirk is called Hide. The description, which is short because quirk science and classification are newish things, says that the user could disappear and become undetectable to human senses. Nothing else. Not even if he could move or how long it could last. Frustrated, Izuku commits the tiny blurb of information to memory. Izuku glosses over 5, having everything he needs to know about Blackwood memorized. Though he does note that 5 had a long life compared to 6, something that makes Izuku feel slightly better. 4 is next. There's almost nothing on him, and a small sticky note on the corner of the page says that it's likely that he was underground as well. There's also only 1 picture of him, low-res and clearly blown up on some program to get a better view. The colors are all wonky, but there are a couple things that stick out. A scar, straight and ugly and running down his left eye. Izuku wonders how close he was to becoming blind when he got it. His eyes were light, and his hair appeared to be blonde, or maybe even white. Even in the awful quality of the photo, Izuku gets the distinct impression that he was angry. 4's quirk is listed as hysterical strength, but the description clearly denotes that it's a cover-up. According to official documents, 4 could detect danger to himself and grow strong enough to survive that danger. It was a powerful ability, but a fake one, as a small asterisk below says that the name was changed when he received the strength of 1 for all to better explain why it looked like he had 2 quirks. Danger Sense was his birth quirk, and the description only says that he could detect danger. Vague and frustrating, 2 things that go hand in hand with the more complicated aspects 1 for all. 3's entry is blank, the only bit of information being that he was male. 2's is similar, though their gender isn't listed. 1's is almost empty, too, but there's a small blurb about the estimated time of his birth and death, along with various theories about his family history. None have any true value. Not much in there, huh? All Might leans forward to look at his handwriting. My old psychic actually did most of the research for this back before we split. His eyes become pain for just the barest of moments. I've only compiled it all together and double-checked some stuff online. I just wish there was more. This is all very important for your future. It's all right, Izuku says, gently closing the notebook. I at least know a little about 2 more quirks, so I'm better off than I was before. Sir Knight, I found most of this. All Might nods. Yes, I was interested in the previous generations back when I was young. Sir also said that it could help on our hunt for All for One to know what had happened to the previous holders. The only thing it told us was that all of them were killed by that bastard. He sounds bitter, as though he wishes he met all of the past users. Izuku can hardly blame him. He shares the same sentiment after all. And then, in the back of Izuku's mind, 1 for all stirs, and a feeling of anger creeps through his mind. Apparently, the quirk might have liked the past holders a good deal. There's no point in dwelling in the past too much, or looking too far into the future. All Might reaches out and rests a hand on Izuku's shoulder. 1 for all comes. Safe, it whispers. Friend, it purrs. What's important, the man continues, is that we keep working in the moment. Together, Izuku smiles, brushing off the feelings of his quirk for later. Together, the rest of summer break is spent doing more and more training. Gran focuses on his reaction time and helping Izuku get a better feel for the new levels of power. All Might pays more attention to direct combat, pushing his successor to the limit of his speed to find an opening. Of course, he doesn't spend all of break improving his skills. His mother wouldn't allow it if he tried, and All Might is no better. So on the days he's forced to stay away from the gym, he spends time with friends. Most of the time, they wander around the city, though there's a fair amount of days spent in. Then there's the inevitable dual birthday party. Hato insisted on it, though Tagada dropped plenty of hints himself. Izuku probably couldn't have refused even if he wanted to, but then again, why would he? His previous birthdays were all lacking. Empty, bare. Just him and his mom, really. All Might did take him out to lunch for his 15th, and that was the first proper celebration he had outside of a nice dinner at home and a small handful of gifts. They decide to spend the day in a mall. It's convenient, big, and has plenty to do. Hato drags them off to a photo booth first thing, and then to an arcade, and then to a few shops. Tagada, Amajiki, and Izuku follow, happy to go along. Amajiki buys a big floppy stocking cap, which promptly goes on his head and probably won't ever come off. Tagada visits a joke shop and buys all sorts of random gadgets, mostly shock gum and a few Wupai cushions. Izuku is forced to buy a few shirts that don't have one word on them and walks out of a clothing store with bags full of stylish, according to Hato, tank tops and jeans. After that, they eat a quick lunch in the food court. It's all junk food, something Izuku knows he shouldn't eat, but he also knows All Might would probably want him to enjoy his birthday as much as possible. Then finally, they watch a movie. Tagada, who's a comedy fan, and Izuku, who prefers action, are at odds. Neither of them wants the other to miss out on their preferred genre and go back and forth debating about what to see. After 10 minutes of it, Hato gets fed up and threatens to make the both of them watch a movie that she picks that they would undoubtedly hate. Izuku and Tagada settle on watching an action comedy pretty quickly after that. After the movie, they go back to Tagada's house. Izuku's apartment is a bit too small for 4 teenagers and 2 parents, but Izuku's mom has no issue going over to someone else's for a small party. In fact, she'd been helping out Tagada's dad with preparing for dinner the whole day they were out. The party back at the house is low-key, focused in the living room around the coffee table where 2 massive photo albums rest. They all take turns cooing and giggling over pictures of baby Tagada wrapped up in a homemade red cape as he's held aloft by his father and photos of a toddler-aged Izuku hopping up and down in an All Might onesie. Music flows through the background, drowned out by laughter. Dinner is made up of a mixture of Izuku's and Tagada's favorites, which clash horribly, but no one really cares. Then the gifts come. From Hato, Izuku gets a simple paracord necklace with a green lightning bolt charm on the end. From Amajiki, he gets a pair of books on advanced quirk biology. From Tagada, he gets a nice leather jacket, colored black and styled with bits of green and red. And from his mom, Izuku gets a few bits of hero merch. Tagada gets a belt from his father, black and expensive looking with a gold buckle style to look like a snarling mouth. Hato gives him a pair of red sweatpants with a floss return to Lemillion custom printed on the side. From Amajiki, Tagada gets a simple letter, which he says he'll open in private later. Izuku's gift is last, and he hands it to his friend shakily. Here, he says, a little unsure. Tagada takes it and fakes like it's way too heavy for him to carry. Everyone has a quick laugh, but focuses back on him easily enough. What's in it? The blonde asks, carefully peeling at the All Might-themed wrapping paper. The package is thin and rectangular with a noticeable bulge in the middle. It's a surprise. Izuku says, I hope you like it. Tearing off the last of the wrapping paper, Tagada looks at his gift. It's a stack of high-quality yearly calendars, the kind a business secretary would use. There are 15 of them, and each day is divided up into pre-noon and post-noon, and there's space to write notes on every week. There's also a large package of ballpoint pens, black, red, and blue. What's it all for? Hato asks, already inspecting a calendar for herself. Well, Tagato wants to save 1,000,000 people. Yeah. Izuku reaches for the pens. He'd spent a lot of time running calculations for this. Not his words, but for the present. I thought that he'd need a way to count right. So I figured out how many pens you'd need to make 1,000,000 tallies, and I found a way to organize them. Is it good enough? Tagata gently sets the calendars down on the coffee table. Before anyone can blink, Izuku is wrapped up in a monstrous bear hug. It's perfect. Izuku smiles, red in the face, either due to embarrassment or the lack of air in the lungs. He hugs back, and if he puts a fraction of a percent of one for all to make it a tighter embrace, no one notices. X again, and make sure you actually try this time. Class is back at UA had started up in mid-July, which was basically another birthday present for Izuku. Training is probably his favorite thing to do, and he always makes sure to try his best. Of course, some parts are better than others. He can't just train his favorites all the time. That's just stupid, and Izuku tries not to be stupid. And so here he is shakily getting up from a dank-smelling wrestling mat and peeling his soaked-through tank top off from his skin for some extra relief from the unbearable heat. Mr. Pink stands before him, red in the face and sweating like a pig. Izuku's no different on that front, but otherwise untouched. The green-haired boy wishes he could be the same, but the ache in his ribs is awful. He'll need to see Recovery Girl after this. Well, I'm waiting. Mr. Pink's impatience spurs Izuku on. He knows how much worse it'll be if he keeps the man waiting. Banned from the use of his quirk, Izuku shifts into a loose fighting stance. Left foot forward, right foot back. One arm lower than the other to protect the belly and groin, the other higher to guard the face and strike. Mr. Pink stays completely still, his mustache glimmering with sweat. Izuku dashes forwards, focused on keeping his balance and watching his teacher's center of gravity. He throws a light jab. The man sways to the side and scoffs. Gritting his teeth, the boy presses forwards, advancing with a series of jabs and hooks, trying to press for an opening. Every one of his attempted strikes is either dodged, blocked, or redirected, and with each failure, his teacher scoffs or makes a rude comment. Truthfully, Izuku respects Mr. Pink. The man is skilled beyond belief and has decades of real experience that's invaluable and, more importantly, the best thing for a teacher to have. But Izuku doesn't understand why the man has to berate him at every turn and put him down whenever he fails. It drives him up a wall, and on days like this, where he's not making a lot of progress, Izuku can feel the compulsion to flick his quirk on. It doesn't help that One for All feeds off of his emotions and tends to urge him to jump to full throttle. But Izuku doesn't bend to any of his impulses. That would be a great way to hurt somebody, and considering that the only other person in the room it's only probably because Black Whip could be turned into a mini Kraken at any moment. But Mr. Pink could most definitely knock Izuku out even if he went all the way up to 24% kick his ass, that somebody would probably be him. So instead of throwing a tantrum, Izuku bides his time. He keeps moving, trying to corral his teacher, who's not attacking for the moment, to teach him how to look for openings into a corner. But, of course, it all goes down the drain. Are you even trying? The teacher spits. How dare you waste my time? Izuku doesn't, or maybe can't take any more of it. He throws a punch way too high and way too overextended. Mr. Pink sees it and moves to counter, retort already leaving his lips. But then Izuku sweeps the man's legs as hard as he can. With his teacher off balance, Izuku tackles him to the ground, trying for a textbook pen. He fails, of course. Mr. Pink is stronger than him and bigger, too. Izuku ends up in a chokehold, gasping for breath. Then he's released and allowed to drop to the ground. Panting, Izuku forces himself to his feet, raising his fist to go again. But something's wrong. Mr. Pink is smiling. That, in and of itself, is horrifying. The man never seems to have an expression other than anger on his face, but now he looks satisfied and vicious at the same time. It's enough to make Izuku's bones chill. That the man says walking over to Izuku and poking a single finger into his chest is exactly the thing you should do in a fight. Fake high, go low. Izuku questions. It was really a textbook maneuver, one of the first he learned. Really, the only unorthodox thing he did was go for a full-body tackle after kicking him off balance, and even that was a good skill. The man laughs, loud and confident. No, not that. Your tackle was timed perfectly. Most people expect to hit the ground when their legs are swept, not get drilled into the mat by 130 pounds of teenager. I what? Izuku asks, scratching his neck. With all the sweat he'd worked up, his fingers slide across his skin. What were you thinking when you did that? The teacher asks. Nothing, really. I just wanted to hit you hard. The man chuckles. That's not a bad start. You should be aiming to get me, or whoever you're fighting, to surrender as fast as possible. And what you did back there was exactly the type of thing that would do it. Bait and switching. Izuku ponders. It definitely has its advantages. Feints, fake-outs, whatever you want to call them. Mr. Pink points over Izuku's shoulder. The boy stupidly looks over it. A hard fist slams into his throat with a smack, and he collapses onto the ground. The hardest hit. The teacher says, looking down at his wheezing student, is the one they don't expect. A dummy, painted white and comically dressed in an old-timey robber's outfit, is slammed against the wall. Its limbs pop out of its sockets, and the head bobs around. A single black, glossy strand is embedded in its chest, twitching for a moment before disappearing. That's way too violent. Eraserhead sighs, walking over to inspect the dummy. To his right, Izuku drops the strand and the dummy collapses. Can you dial it back? You snagged me and Mike up in the practical, and you had no problem picking up the balls at camp. It's just really hyper right now, Izuku says, worriedly eyeing the damage done to his thankfully non-living target. It just wants to do something big, but I'm restricting it to one whip. It's really hard to hold back when it wants to break free really bad. Eraserhead looks at him tiredly. You can raise hell with your quirk later. Right now we are doing capture training, which, as you know, is a delicate art. One for all itches beneath Izuku's skin, particularly in his palm. Rip and tear, it howls. Kill has been mad all morning, for some reason or another, but for the life of him, Izuku can't figure out why. Soon, Izuku thinks back. After this, give me control now and you'll be free soon. With a metaphorical huff of anger, One for All stops pushing against him, and Izuku takes the ropes. I'm ready to try again, he says out loud. Eraserhead eyes him carefully. Fine, he says, pointing to another dummy in a long line of dummies. Get one of them. Reaching out a hand, Izuku forces a strand of black whip out with a grunt. Matte black, it hits the nearest dummy in the chest, knocking it back a bit before quickly weaving around it like a long coil of rope. Definitely an improvement, Aizawa says dryly, inspecting his work. You'll have to do better at keeping silent when you use it, and hitting people with a blunt force can come in handy if you need to stun them, but it's frowned upon with capture gear. Just go right for the snare. First, Izuku nods, understanding. He retracts the whip, letting it dissipate into a small cloud of smoke. Do you think I could try two at once like this? They're bigger than the ones I was working with back at camp, but I had 6 then. Aizawa eyes him critically for a moment. Later, he decides. For now, we'll do something more hands-on. UA has 4 major fall cities and a dozen minor ones. The major 4, which are all in different styles, one is planned in a perfect grid system, one is haphazard and random, one is industrial, and another political take up half of the campus in their own. The minor 12 make up another 10% combined, but are much more high-tech. The one Aizawa leads Izuku to is the Night City. Completely encased in a dome, the Night City perfectly models a lower-class slum that would be found in a big city. A fake moon casts light down at an angle, but there are no fake stars. Neon signs and broken street lights provide the rest of the light needed to navigate the area, and the whole city is kept dirty for extra realism. It also stinks of filth, and Izuku crinkles his nose as he steps inside of the dome because of it. Just inside the entrance is a small, dimly lit park. A basketball court is a few dozen meters to the right, and to the front is a broad city street made up of fake shops and apartments. It may as well be midnight with how little light there is. In front of him, Aizawa reaches under his scarf and pulls on his goggles. You'll be stalking me. The man says, already slinging a strand of his scarf up to a street light to launch himself forward. I get a 30-second head start, and you can't make a capture until we've gotten to the city square. Understand? Izuku nods, gym uniform rustling along with him. He misses his old suit, but it was damaged beyond repair. At least Power Loader is having him draw up some new designs. Good with that final word, Eraserhead shoots off to a rooftop barely visible in the darkness. Izuku counts to 30 before kicking off into the air with Float. Right now, he is the hunter, which lends itself to two schools of thought. He could either be overt in his stalking, taking to the air where Aizawa could see him and simply wait until the man corners himself, or he could be covert and stalk from the shadows. Aizawa could race quirks and wouldn't corner himself in the type of place he operated in, so the choice is a no-brainer. Izuku lands on a rooftop with a roll, absorbing the impact and making as little noise as possible. One for All makes a small nudge against his mind, not enjoying all the sneaking that's to come. In the distance, he spies Aizawa swinging across the street. Izuku heads in his direction, leaping up and taking care to keep all of the green lightning inside of him. Landing with another roll, Izuku presses on, following little shadows of movement in the distance as he analyzes the city for a good spot to strike. There are plenty of back alleys and dead ends, but Aizawa won't be caught dead in one if he's being hunted, so Izuku keeps looking. He needs a spot with at least 2 escape points, mostly so he can lure Eraserhead into a trap, but also so he can get out of there if the situation turns on him. If he found a good spot, he'd simply push Aizawa in the direction and try to gradually put him in the figurative noose. Then Izuku would block off the biggest exit and force into the smallest one, which would be sealed off with Black Whip. If all went well, he wouldn't be seen directly, and he wouldn't have to do much direct fighting. But he needs a spot first, and keeping an eye on his quarry is a must. By the time Aizawa reaches the town square, Izuku has 2 possible areas to use. In a perfect world, he'd have time to scope out the parts of the city he hasn't seen as well, but he'll have to work with what he has. Crouching on an empty water tower, Izuku watches as Eraserhead casually strolls through an empty parking lot. If you were hunting anyone else, Izuku would attack right now, but open areas are Eraser's the quirk's strong suit. All it would take is one loud rustle of clothing or the squeak of sneakers on metal, and Aizawa's eyes would be red and scanning the area, no doubt blocking Izuku's quirk, so the boy waits and bides his time. After about a minute of standing in the middle of the parking lot and looking around, Aizawa slinks off into a back alley. Izuku, forced to move or face losing him, floats up and across the parking lot. Going high like this is risky, but there's no good cover in the openness of the square, so it's best to keep high and hope. He reaches a tall office building and looks down for Eraserhead, who can't have moved far. The group of buildings below him is devoid of all but glowing lights, so Izuku moves to a different side. Still nothing. There's not much on the 3rd and 4th sides as well, or nothing he can see from his bird's-eye view. So Izuku is forced to choose between going down or flying off to a different part of the city. Again, if Aizawa catches him in the air, he's done for. The better option is to descend and search from the ground. Izuku is the hunter, so he has to keep the pressure up. Free-falling from the top of the office building, everyone from his mother to Gran seems to hate when he does this, but it's just so much fun and there really is no risk. Izuku lands on the concrete in the middle of an alley. He scans the shadows carefully, making sure to not miss a single corner. Finding nothing, he moves on. He looks through 2 more alleys, but both are empty. On the 3rd one, Izuku feels the hairs on his neck stand up. He feels his pulse quicken, and he starts to move faster. Some small, animalistic part of his mind tells him that he's being watched. He starts to move out of the alley, wanting the comfort of an open area, but he's too slow. A rustle of clothing, the hiss of cloth flying through the air, the thump of a body hitting the ground. Izuku is tangled up in a capture weapon, quirk nullified. He sighs, uncomfortable with the silence in his head. Aizawa approaches, quirk still on, and retracts his scarf. Izuku is released and stands up quickly. I was supposed to be hunting, the boy says, fully knowing that there's a good reason why Aizawa did what he did. The teacher only blinks, and Izuku braces against the mental strain of his quirk. It's still mad, unfortunately. Prey doesn't like being chased. The man says, whoever you're stalking will catch on eventually and try to pull something. That's what happened at the end before I got you. Izuku nods, brushing his gym uniform for dust. I lost you after you crossed the parking lot, he says. Where'd you go? Nowhere, Aizawa says. Izuku only cocks his head in confusion. The teacher's expression shifts to something more devious. I didn't leave the street I got on. I just ducked into a random door and waited. That's Izuku ponders. It's really smart, actually. But how realistic was it? Decently so if Aizawa did it in a lesson. It was something you weren't expecting. Aizawa finishes for him. You thought I'd keep moving, correct? Well, I used it to my advantage and got the drop on you. That's why I won. So I should have acted quicker. Izuku asks. Aizawa nods. But that's not the only important thing. What would have happened if you went right for a fight when the 30 seconds were up? I wouldn't have been able to do anything, Izuku says. You would have reacted too fast, and there weren't any good spots to launch an attack from. I think you might have had a better chance than you think. Aizawa looks over the street, eyes taking in every detail. If Izuku is being honest, he'd say that the man probably has the whole city layout memorized. I've been involved in almost all of your teaching for the past 4.5 months, Midoriya. I know how you think, and I know how you plan. I fully expected you to wait things out until there was a perfect moment. If you had attacked as soon as possible, I'd have been surprised, but I know you can react fast enough to capture me even if I do something like that. Izuku argues. Aizawa shrugs. Maybe. But my point is that waiting for the perfect moment is stupid. Make your own perfect moments with unexpected techniques and above all surprise. The man turns very serious for a moment. If I had to pick between having my scarf at all times or always having the element of surprise, I'd throw off this piece of cloth faster than you could blink. There is no more efficient way to deal with an opponent than attacking when they least expect it. I've done many missions that I otherwise couldn't have done just by doing something completely out of left field. Izuku nods, mind already speeding off, but he isn't finished. That's not an excuse to be dumb and reckless. Aizawa's eyes bore into Izuku's soul. Think before you act, always. Consider what your enemy knows, what they might know, and what they don't know. Plan accordingly and then get the job done. Yes, sir. So have you been thinking about a new costume lately? Izuku looks up from tying his shoes to look at Hato, who's casually slipping into her own costume. The first time she changed outside of a stall, he nearly had a heart attack, but now he's more or less used to it. A little, Izuku says, looking away a bit too quickly. More or less doesn't mean completely. In the background, Tagata and Amajiki pause their conversation to listen in. I know it has to work with my whips and that it'll be green, but I have no idea of what else to do. You should try to make it work with your style and super moves. Tagata suggests checking over his cape for any damage. I don't have any super moves, Izuku points out, and I don't really have a style. I just fight, you know. That's a load of crap. Hato points a finger at Izuku so close that it nearly brushes against his nose. We all have different styles here. Amajiki is tactical and efficient, Tagata is weird and unorthodox, and you're ridiculously fast and random. Like I don't even think I've ever accurately predicted a move of yours. Ever? What about you, Tagata? A handful of times, but only when he finds something new and tries it out. The blond boy says as he straightens his gloves. Other than that, I don't even think Midoriya knows what he's about to do in a fight. Izuku flushes. Not thinking is a bad thing. I shouldn't do that. I might slip up and miss something if I get lost in the fight. Maybe. Hato shrugs. But really, not being able to read someone is annoying. Add that to your speed, and bam, you've got a style. Okay, but I don't have any super moves. And how do you design a suit to work with random maneuvers? Izuku stands and straightens out his gym uniform jacket. You pulled Hato out of the air and then put her in a headlock last week. Amajiki speaks up. You've got your air blasts, and you have this really good punching combo that's good enough to bruise my tentacles. Those are basically super moves in all but name. Izuku sighs. I'll think about it. Thanks, you guys. A short time later, the four of them are lined up in front of Mr. Aizawa in a grassy open field. The sun beats down, but it's not unbearable, though Izuku does feel bad for his friends since they're in full hero gear. Overheating could be a problem, but hopefully they'll stop if it gets too bad. Some of you have an advantage in a wide open space like this. Aizawa starts, looking at Hato and Amajiki. Others of you are at a disadvantage. He looks at Izuku and Nagata this time, though he lingers on the taller boy. Izuku can manage pretty well in open spaces with burst style, but full cowling is much more suited to enclosed areas by design. But that's how it is in the real world. Pros have to make the best of the worst. We'll start with one-on-ones, then move on to two-on-twos and three-on-ones. Izuku blinks. 3-on-1, he asks, making sure. Aizawa grunts. Yes, 3-on-1. It should be interesting. Or painful, Amajiki mumbles. Nah, it won't be that bad. Tagata says, gazing over the perfectly manicured lawn that won't be like that for much longer. They should be over in a flash, right? None of us could take on the other three for long. We'll see about that, Aizawa says, bringing the attention of the students back to him. Midoriya, Tagata, you're up first. Nodding, the two boys move away from the group and over to a different portion of the lawn. Carefully analyzing his opponent, Izuku lets one for all soak into his skin. Tagata has a good feel for his style, and even if Izuku's moves are random, the blonde boy is still crafty enough to dodge or phase through everything Izuku throws at him. Izuku's first instinct is to go right for a rush and try to force Tagata on the back foot with a direct assault. Between the burst style and his regular full cowling, he could close the distance and start attacking in a blink. But the hardest hit is the one they don't see coming. Surprise is your best weapon. Make your own perfect moments. With a deep breath, Izuku preemptively wakens Black Whip just enough to make his hands itch and for his quirk to prod at his mental walls. He's never really used Black Whip extensively in a spar before. Sure, he's grabbed onto people and other objects with it, but never anything like Five had done. But the self-aware quirk is meant for mobility and quick movements. Izuku knows that. So perhaps you may begin when ready, Aizawa says casually. With a kick, Izuku dashes forwards, drawing a fist back to throw a punch at Tagata's head. It's a basic opening, something he's done a million times. But it's different now. Tagata, who's already jumping up in the air to gain momentum for one of his ground leaps, prepares for Izuku's fist to phase through his head, but it never comes. At the last second, right before the hit lands, Izuku throws a hand out to the side. A single black tendril erupts from his palm, embedding in the ground. Izuku jerks to the side, and Tagata flinches at the speed of his change of direction. As Tagata starts to sink into the ground, fully permeable, Izuku hits the ground and spins to a stop. He waits for just a split second before dashing a dozen meters away from where he landed. Tagata expects this and will surely pop out and try to get his bearings before going on the offensive. But Izuku won't let him. The second the blonde boy pops out, Izuku pounces. Leaping high into the air, he shoots out two whips this time, one on either side of Tagata. He speeds to the boy feet first, as though he's intending to slam into his torso. Tagata, still midair, sees this and smiles. Izuku has done similar things before, happy to miss out on a good hit to drive more air from his lungs. But not this time. Izuku's feet sink a millimeter into Tagata's ribcage, and then he changes directions. A burst from float to push him higher in the air. A strand of Black Whip to change directions. A rush of air from the speed at which he moves. Izuku tackles Tagata midair, grabbing onto the boy's legs and slamming him to the ground. Eyes wide, Tagata goes fully permeable, forced into the earth. Izuku stays midair, waiting. His opponent pops up in a split second, sucking in a huge breath of air and keeping a close eye on Izuku, who doesn't want to stay put. Targeting the head this time, Izuku throws a bait punch right at Tagata's jaw as he bursts forth. But Tagata is caught on. Instead of letting it phase, he ducks. Izuku flips over his head, but that's exactly what he wants. Like the time before, two strands of Black Whip pull him forward faster than I can see, and Izuku's feet slam into Tagata's back, forcing him down. Overshooting Tagata's body, Izuku halts a few feet away, eyeing the other boy as he gets back up and shrugs off the big hit he took. Tagata smiles, bright and warm. Izuku smiles back, hungry and feral. The blond boy dips into the ground, then back up again, and Izuku charges too. 10 feet up into the air, they clash. Tagata throws a hook which Izuku lets bite his face. He'll take the trade. A leg hooks around Tagata's blue legs, pulling him in. Izuku lets him phase through his body completely, already taking advantage of the boy's blindness to spin around and prepare another attack. Tagata lands on the grass with a roll, popping up and moving in a random direction before Izuku can pin him down. But that's fine. It means Tagata's more worried about not playing into his hands than getting his own hits in. Izuku pursues, letting out 5 whips to flail around, masking his movements. Tagata dodges them expertly, but can't keep track of all of them and Izuku at the same time. So the younger boy closes the gap in a blink, winding up for a massive punch to the gut. Tagata weaves out of the way, only to be met with a kick to the head. Turning his quirk off, Izuku moves forward to Tagata, who's laying belly up on the ground and breathing hard. "You all right?" he asks, extending a hand. "Yeah, I'm good." Tagata groans, grabbing onto Izuku and hauling himself up. "I think you rattled my teeth with that last kick. Sorry, I should have dialed it back." Izuku grimaces, reaching out and moving Tagata's head to the side with his fingers. His kick caught him in the back half of his right cheek, and it's already forming a massive bruise. Izuku gives it a gentle poke. Tagata hisses. Izuku jerks away. "Sorry." No, it's fine." Tagata smiles, rubbing his cheek. "It's not like I used my jaw to fight, and it doesn't hurt that bad. Are you sure about that?" The pair of boys look over to see Aizawa, flanked by Hato and Amajiki, who look a touch worried. "Midoriya can kick hard enough to break concrete. You could easily have a concussion." "Nah, everything's clear," Tagata insists. "You can even check me over if you need to." Aizawa eyes him critically before nodding. "Fine, Midoriya, what % were you at when you kicked him?" 3, sir," Izuku answers. "It's weak enough to be okay for a human skull, but I kinda put a lot of oomph in it, so Tagata can see the old lady later. It's probably fine. But if he starts to feel bad, he should stop what he's doing and immediately go to the infirmary." Aizawa gives one last hard stare at a sheepish Tagata. "Now, what were your plans going into this fight?" "I wanted to bait him into a floor lock," Tagata says, referring to one of his favorite ways of restraining opponents. "If I could get my arms or legs around his neck, I could have dragged him down and gotten a win pretty easily." "Midoriya, I wanted to put him in a lose-lose situation," Izuku says. "I thought that if I could make him second-guess himself and make him unsure of where and when I'd strike, then I could get a finishing hit in, and I did." "That's a pretty good strategy," Aizawa comments. "Tagata is good at reading people, and I saw that he caught on at the end, so you used the whips to press more. You did, in fact, put him in a bad situation, but it won't work twice." Tagata gives Izuku a playful elbow. "I won't keep going airborne next time, which is a good defense against it, no. If things get too heated, I'll just slip underground." "That could work." Izuku nods. "You just have to manage your breathing, which you're already good at. The best way to get out of a bad situation is to just never be there," Amajiki mumbles. Aizawa gives a small nod of approval. "Anyways," Hato smiles, practically floating up to Izuku. "Those were really sweet moves. On one of them, it was like your feint hit Muriel harder than the actual attack. It was super cool. Teach me." "I mean, it wasn't really all that cool," Izuku babbles. "I just wanted to keep him guessing and on the back foot. I thought that making it so that no matter if Tagata dodged or phased, he'd have to take a bit would lead to victory. He's got 3 big options with his quirk and skill set: dodge, phase, or sink into the floor, so making all of them a bad option was a good idea for me. I don't think it'd really work on other people, though." "I disagree." Izuku's head snaps over to Racerhead, who looks thoughtful. "Against weaker and, frankly, dumber villains, lots of feints would be useless, but against villains on your level, intelligent ones who can fight on the level of pros, you'd be able to use it on them to great effect. See, you're amazing." Hato snags Izuku by the arm. "Now teach me, and maybe later." Izuku squeaks. "We still have a lot of class left." Fine. X. Self-healing fabric. Why the hell would you need that?" Izuku looks up from his sketch of a new costume design and over to Power Loader. The workshop therein is occupied by busy support course students and is filled with noise, a far cry from the quiet design studio across the hall. I have an idea for a special move, and my quirk tends to rip my clothes. Izuku explains, flipping open a nearby notebook to a sketch of him with tendrils of black whip extending from his torso. Self-healing fabric could keep repairs from happening and would help with durability in the field. That stuff ain't cheap, you know. The man grumbles. But yeah, I see your point. What parts of your suit had the self-healing stuff? Oh, almost all of it. Izuku taps the boots of the drawing. Not these, of course, but just about everything else. Power Loader shakes his head. No, that won't do. The effort it would take to make gloves out of the stuff would be wasted. It's just not cost-effective. I've heard about your quirk from Eraser. It's mostly hand-based, yeah? Izuku nods. Yeah, you'd shred your gloves every time you used its self-healing fabric, or no, you'll either have to go gloveless or think around the problem. Izuku bites his lip. The gloves are integral to the design and will help me out in fights. They have to stay. Maybe. He flips to a blank page and quickly sketches a rough top-down view of a glove. He adds some details, like little notches in the knuckles and an opening near where his hand meets his wrist. Having gaps would help while maintaining overall protection. The material just has to be tough. Power Loader looks over his sketch and the rest of the pages detailing the new costume. It should be fine, he says. Just don't let Aizawa see your goggles. Izuku leaves the workshop after that, bright red and trying to forget about the double-page spread detailing a pair of barred eyewear. Nejar flits about casually, circling around Mirio and Tamaki as they talk about school stuff. In the corner of the room, which has 2 doors and 3 windows looking over a fake city and is their training area for the day, is Racerhead, who only looks half awake per usual. She's always wondered how the man juggled teaching and full-time hero duties, but the sleeping bag he carries around all the time answers the question pretty well. Still, Nejar wants to know from Aizawa himself, but the man is almost always grumpy and doesn't particularly enjoy chatter, so she keeps quiet. For now, of course, the only reason she's thinking about Aizawa's sleeping schedule is because a certain someone is taking their sweet time in the locker room. Nejar grumbles. She exaggerates, of course. She's not really mad, but hey, a girl's allowed to be impatient. What's taking Midoriya so long? It's his new costume, Tagada says cheerfully. To his left, Tamaki gets the glow in his eyes that comes every time his best friend, more like crush, but he refuses to admit it, says something happy. It's probably different from his old one, so he needs some time getting into it. Remember when Tamaki changed his costume last year? It was weeks before he was fully used to it. It's just spandex, though, right? Can't be that hard to put on. Nejar thinks out loud. Or maybe he changed it up. Do you think he'd make it con this time? Wait, no, that's too warm. Leather, maybe. No, that's not his thing. Maybe he went for a full suit of armor. They're all highly unlikely, of course, but she likes to pretend. Izuku with his total, though it's more like slight these days, baby face dressed in full night regalia is a fun thing to think about. Or even Midoriya dressed like one of those kids from her middle school who had 10 piercings and wore leather even if it was boiling outside. Funny stuff. It's probably just a slight difference he wants to make sure he gets right. Tamaki says, ever the voice of reason. You know how diligent he is. Nah, that's not as fun. Nejar says, floating up a few feet and rolling over on her back to look at the ceiling. Already she's counting specks of dust. I think he completely overhauled it. That's a Midoriya thing to do, especially when he gets inspired. Or that, Tamaki concedes. Not even a second later, they get their answer. Midoriya walks through the door as is usual when not in active combat, anyways clumsy self, nearly tripping over nothing. Hey guys. He greets, waving a hand. Nejar looks over and promptly freezes. Midoriya looks good, she thinks. He definitely changed his costume a lot, too. Those 2 facts are probably related. His boots, which come up to his knees and are shaped exactly like All Might's, are mismatched, the left one white and the right one black. The accents on his shoes are red, keeping the familiar motif, but they're subtle and dark, not distracting in any way as they add a touch of color. From the knees, which are padded slightly up, the suit is green, lighter between his legs and under his arms, darker across the front. A red belt made entirely of circular bits that probably store stuff runs from shoulder to hip, brushing up against a small red sash around his navel. His breathing thingy is still there, matte gray, and hanging from his neck along with the necklace she got him for his birthday. Like his boots, Midoriya's gloves are mismatched, the right one white and the left one black. Both have small holes in the heel of the palm and on the knuckles, which are reinforced with bits of hard-looking material. His shoulders are padded with white bits of padding, and on the crown of his head is a set of goggles, which are really more like a mask, thick all the way around, with bits of black cloth around the white bard exactly like Ozawa's, which is hilarious lenses, giving it a domino mask look. Whoa, Neji breathes, zooming over. She flicks his goggles down to get the complete look before backing off again. You look awesome. He aids, thanks. Izuku says, a touch flushed. Mirio and Tamaki join her in looking over the costume. Looking good, man. Mirio says, patting him on the back. How long did you work on it for? Just a couple weeks. Midoriya says, pulling off his goggles and fingering them a bit. He has a lot of nervous tics like that, or maybe they're just habits. He bites his lip a lot and likes to chew on his inner cheek. Once I had a good idea, it all just came together easily. Did you change the fabric? Neji asks, looking closely at his chest. It looks different from before. Yeah, I did. Midoriya smiles proudly. Here, watch. One of his black whips tears through the bit of fabric where his rib cage is. It moves around like a curious snake for a bit before disappearing. There's a hole in Midoriya's costume now, but it fixes itself, almost like magic. Ooh, that's cool, Neji says, getting eye level with the newly healed fabric. How does it work? Well, the training, Tamaki says suddenly. He looks mightily embarrassed, but it's an improvement from when he wouldn't ever interrupt someone last year. We have training to do, remember. That's correct, Ozawa's monotone voice says. The man approaches the four of them calmly. He takes one look at Midoriya, and then his goggles, which look exactly like his but white and with extra cloth. It's cute, really, and then inhales sharply. Problem child. He mutters, sounding tired. Neji suppresses a giggle, and so does Tagata. Midoriya looks very red, and Tamaki wears an amused smirk. Costume changes aside, Ozawa continues, pointedly choosing to not look at his favorite. There's no way to deny it. Neji is willing to die in this hill student. We'll be working in pairs today. Tagata and Majiki, you'll be doing combo attacks. There's bots just outside waiting for you. Hato, Midoriya, flying. Neji mulls it over for a moment, then excitement. Finally, she cheers, grabbing Midoriya by the arm and dragging him over to the door. He's a bit heavy, but weight training and cardio exercise are good for some things, and she manages to take him with her. Let's go. It's been ages since I've really got to have an actual fly. Midoriya babbles on about not having enough directions, but Ozawa doesn't stop them, so it's probably over nothing. Neji takes the boy out the door and carries him up into the open sky, her stomach fluttering like it always does when she flies. Eventually, she releases Midoriya, who doesn't even flinch, and flies up to be eye level with her. You got taller, Neji observes. On the ground, she could chalk it up to extra heels in his boots, but in the sky it's obvious. He put on a couple more centimeters at least. A little, yeah. He smiles. Hopefully I won't be short forever, haha. Neji giggles a bit, too. Yeah, maybe you can catch up to Mirio. Then he can stop making short jokes. Not that he does a lot already. Yeah, Midoriya says, looking over the city below. What do you want to start with? Your super cool moves, obviously. Neji decides, zooming over to him. I want to see if I can move like you do, but without all the punching. You're not really a melee fighter, are you? Midoriya says, rubbing his neck, which is another one of his habits. Neji shrugs. I can throw a punch, all heroes can. But I'd rather not deal with close fighting, you know. I like to stay back and let my waves do the talking. Yeah, I kinda do. Midoriya takes a second to gather his thoughts. Well, he starts, you won't use this stuff like me. I focus on setting up a hard hit or a tackle, usually, but you'll probably use this to keep people guessing about where you are and to get into a nice firing position, right? Nedjar nods, but doesn't say anything. Nice, so the basic maneuver is. Nedjar lets Mitter ramble as much as he wants, soaking in information like a sponge. He shows her some of his basic combos and ideas of how she can use them, and she practices a bit on them, getting a feel for how much power to put out and where to put it out from. Then they play tag. It's a good way to apply new ideas in a simple way, he says. All Nedjar hears is that she can fly as much as she likes. Midoriya is at first and leads her on a wild chase all over the city. They circle around statues, duck under bridges, and leap from buildings. It's heart-pounding, fun, and a touch dangerous. She loves it. After tag, they do more drills. Midoriya shows her more moves and she copies. Some are hard, others are easy, but it's putting them all together that's hard. Nedjar doesn't know how Midoriya manages to do all of it with barely a thought, but she's determined to get to that level, too. After the drills come flying spars. They're at a breakneck pace, 100 or so feet in the air, and probably aren't safe. But that's fine. Nedjar will catch Midoriya if he falls and vice versa. There's no need to worry, and the reward outweighs the risk. The spars go more or less 50-50. They both hold back a little because it's training and also way up in the sky, not to mention that Midoriya has the reality equivalent of that old shonen I was only using 3% of my power thing going on. Nedjar's pretty sure that if he hit her at his max, which is like 20% or something. Details aren't important, but if he hit her at his full power, then she'd probably die, which doesn't sound like fun, so it's fine that he holds back. Once they're bored of sparring, which takes a while because fighting is fun, they just fly. Nothing flashy is done, there's no weird handicap applied, and it's not really for training. It's just flying to fly, it's something that's amazing in every way. It's a common sentiment between them, something Nedjar likes to see in the workaholic Midoriya, who will probably end up like his homeroom teacher before he's 20. They talk, too. Flying in silence is awkward. It's mostly random things, and all of the random things somehow relate back to quirks. Nedjar wonders if it's possible to get an honorary degree in quirk science because Midoriya should definitely have one. His ideas for applying them are top-notch, and he has up-to-date information on the latest developments in the field memorized. It's impressive and a touch scary because Midoriya could probably think of some kind of flaw in every quirk ever, but there's really nothing to fear because he wouldn't hurt a fly that didn't attack first. But that's only a passing thought. She's mostly focused on how nice it is to just listen to someone and be listened to back. They fly and talk for so long that they lose track of time, and Aizawa has to search the rooftops for them with the other two boys. There's a lot of happy teasing from Mirio, which is expected, and Tamaki smiles a bit, too, which is nice to see. But Aizawa has them all settled down and looks them over with a serious eye. The principal has been watching clips of you four's training. The man says he likes what he sees and thinks your development has been beyond your years. As such, he says they are all ready for the next step. What's the next step? Midoriya asks, and Nedjar remembers that, oh yeah, he's a first year. Aizawa locks eyes with the boy. The provisional license exam. He says, like one would comment on the weather. Wait, really? Awesome. All right. After that we can do work studies right. I hope I don't fail. Yes, it's very exciting, Aizawa says tiredly. But it's also nothing to take lightly. Half the takers pass, and most of them are third years for the one you'll be taking. Wait, so we're not doing it in the fall with the rest of our grade? Tagata asks. No, Nedzu says you're all fine to go a bit early. Aizawa's gaze sweeps over them one last time. Any other questions? There are none. Great, I have a mountain of paperwork to do. Go get changed to bother someone else. Nedjar smiles as they walk back to the locker room, listening intently as Midoriya rambles about the history of the test they'll be taking. What a great day. 28. The provisional license exam has been around for almost as long as the official hero license. Just after the Dark Times, which is an awful yet apt name for the decades following the original quirk, it had become apparent that giving a bunch of vigilantes who didn't follow the law and often didn't care for it cards that said I can beat up any criminal I want with no repercussions was a bad idea, so a system was made.
Yeah, the system was made. Yeah. But still, that system imitation is still horrible. So it is still bad, and laws have not been changed for originally how fucking these works in Japan apparently. Because these suck badly.
First, there was the training wheels phase. A hero wannabe would apply to a government-recognized and approved hero agency or approach a hero for an apprenticeship. The student would be closely watched and nurtured, hopefully learning how to hero the correct and safe way rather than copy what the old comics said. After the training wheels phase came the intermediate license. It allowed for the holder to commit acts of heroism in emergency situations and to stop crimes they happened upon. Intermediate license holders could not patrol on their own or actively seek out crime, and to get one, a hero in training needed to take a test. The full license was the next step, which is self-explanatory. The general idea of the graduated system: don't do anything without a real hero nearby. We trust you to save lives, but always defer to someone with more experience. To your real hero, save all the lives that you can still use. With the creation of hero schools, it's only become more streamlined. The schools pick the students, and the students follow the same steps as their predecessors to become heroes. Izuku has run through that same line of thought over and over for hours, trying to wrap his head around the fact that he is about to try and take the next big step, a license. For him, he'll be an official provisional hero. He wonders what the actual card feels like. All Might has shown Izuku his, and it's very high quality with lots of tiny details, and his picture, of course. He also wonders what the test will contain. Aizawa said that it was all practical with an interview, but also that the contents changed regularly, so there's no real way to know the exact contents of the test. That makes Izuku nervous. There's nothing worse than taking a test you couldn't study for. Hey, why so serious? A pale, slender finger pokes his cheek, waking Izuku from his internal monologue. Up ahead, Aizawa sits in the vehicle's passenger seat, next to Present Mike as the louder man drives. In the back, Izuku is squished between Hato and Amajiki, with Tagata getting the window. With how small their group is, they only have a small van rather than a full bus. Just nerves, I guess, Izuku says, looking over at Hato. Like the rest of them, she's dressed down in a half-complete uniform. A simple button-down, no tie, and trousers instead of the skirt. The last bit was so they'd all match according to her, but the way she kicks her feet up on the window and lays down in the back seat with her head on Izuku's right thigh says otherwise. Hey, I get that, Hato says, nodding her head. A mob of periwinkle hair laid across Izuku, Amajiki, and Tagata's laps wiggles with her. But the principal says we're ready, so it'll all be fine, right? Maybe, Izuku says, looking out of the front windshield. It's past rush hour and not a lot of people drive these days, so the roads are almost empty. City streets fly by, and they only rarely have to stop for pedestrians. It only has a 50% pass rate, Amajiki mumbles. He's right to worry. Hey, none of that. Hato reaches a hand across Izuku to poke Amajiki on the nose. We're gonna do great. We'll pass with flying colors. Right, Tagata? Yep, the blonde boy leans forwards and gives Izuku a thumbs up. We've been training for weeks. All of us have multiple super moves, and our quirks are strong. We'll pass for sure. Yeah, Izuku says, forcing a smile. Up in the front, Present Mike snickers. You hear that, Sho? The man says. His usually slick-back hair is styled in a messy bun today, if only to save space in the van. Your kids are getting cocky back there. Gonna do something about it. Focus on the road. Aizawa grumbles. And I don't care. They're smart enough to know that overconfidence is a bad thing. You didn't deny that they were your kids, Mike says, a smirk audible in his voice. Aizawa doesn't say anything back, but Izuku can practically feel the dead-eyed stare across the 2 feet separating them. Hato giggles, shoulders shaking and bumping into Izuku's leg. Do you really think we can't do it? She asks, looking over to the rearview mirror to see if she can look Mike in the eye. She's smiling despite her question. Nah, you four are great, President Mike says, eyes still on the road. Aizawa won't admit it, but the whole faculty thinks you're hot shit. Watch your language, Aizawa mutters. Mike rolls his eyes, though Izuku can only tell that he does from how his head bobs. They're teenagers, Shota. Teenagers. Even if they're little angels, they've heard worse. Remember our high school days. Unfortunately, Aizawa huffs. Why do you mean unfortunately? Mike says, sounding appalled. Sure, it wasn't all sunshine and daisies, but it was fun. Our provisional license exam is an example. Remember when you tripped over your scarf because you were checking who? Oh, look, we're here. Aizawa suddenly cuts him off, looking out the window at a massive stadium-like building. The four students in the back all squish to one side, pressing against the glass to get a good look. And what a good look it is. The whole structure is the size of a city and is easily as tall as a skyscraper. It's a miracle of engineering, not to mention a great feat of construction. The parking lot alone is twice the size of Izuku's apartment complex, and inside it can only get more impressive because underneath the domed ceiling are state-of-the-art simulation areas designed to portray the real world as perfectly as possible. After they park and get out, it only gets more impressive. The doorway is massive and would easily accommodate anyone with a gigantification quirk or even an entire 3-story house. The whole thing is sleek and clean, too, kept spotless by who knows how many workers or robots. Tagata makes a comment about how many tax dollars it must have cost, and it sends Izuku down a whole other rabbit hole because that's something he didn't think of. It must have been billions, or even a trillion. How could they have afforded to build it, or even maintain the thing? You can ogle once you've got your licenses, Aizawa says gruffly. He's not looking at them, but rather at the other schools who have also arrived. He looks cautious, like he expects an ambush. After a few seconds of checking his surroundings, he looks at the 4 curious students. Get your stuff from the van, he orders. Walking inside of the lobby is a surreal experience. It's not as big as one would expect, but it is tall. One door leads in, another leads out to somewhere. Off to the sides, there are massive hallways numbered and labeled. In the middle of the floor is a long desk, where multiple secretaries sit in front of expensive-looking computers. Aizawa walks up to one of the secretaries, tailed by the students and President Mike. A quick conversation and a bit of paperwork later, and they're ready to go change. Each school president gets its own area to change and warm up in. Since UA only brought 4 test takers, they get the smallest one, which is the size of Izuku's apartment and divided into a sitting room and an actual locker room. They waste no time changing, taking off their uniforms with practiced ease and unpacking costumes. Izuku carefully checks over his costume for any signs of damage. He's not really expecting any, but it's good to be sure. Finding none, he starts to put it on. First comes the one-piece bodysuit, which goes from his mid-calf to his shoulders. He'd gone for a more relaxed and calm design this time around, with a small color palette and simple shapes. Once the bodysuit is zipped up, he puts on the boots. They're tough and stiff, which is by design. They're there to provide extra support and take a beating before they break. Like many things about Izuku, his boots are inspired by All Might, with the diamond-shaped knee bits and the overall length. After the boots come the accessories. The waist sash is first, taken right from Nana's own costume sans the gold buckle. Then comes the chest belt, inspired by Five's belt of bullet casings, while also doubling as storage for first aid stuff, food, and other things he might need. His respirator is next, cold and heavy metal that also guards his neck when not worn. It covers up his necklace a bit, which is fine. He doesn't want to damage it. Stepping out of the locker room with his googles between his teeth as he pulls on his gloves, Izuku looks at the clock on the wall. It's divided into 2 parts, one telling the normal time and the other counting down from 5 minutes. Eraserhead and President Mike sit on a couch, both looking down at their phones. Hearing Izuku's footsteps, Aizawa looks up. Ready, he asks. Izuku nods, much too nervous to speak or sit. He wonders what the timer means. Does the test start in 5 minutes? It's less than that now, which only serves to make him more nervous. Maybe it's a timer for how long it takes them to change from civilian clothes into hero costume. That's an important skill to have. Hey-oh, we're ready. Hato kicks the door to the locker room open, rushing out and practically bouncing with excitement. Midoriya, you changed so quickly. Are you still nervous? She approaches her friend and casually bumps her shoulder on his own. Just a little, Izuku says, looking over to see Tagata and Amajiki walking out as well. One of them is practically shaking with nerves and the other is even brighter than usual. And my costume is pretty easy to put on. Cool. Hato floats over to look at the clock on the wall, which now shows that there are 2 minutes until something happens. What's this for? She looks at the two teachers. Some worker for the HBSC will come by in a sec. Mike answers, turning off his phone. They'll take you guys one by one to an interviewing booth. You'll all get 2 minutes to talk to a real news anchor about something. It's probably going to be about yourself, so that shouldn't be too hard. Try not to sweat it, you dig? It's a bit late for that, Amajiki mumbles, already tucked away in a corner with his hood pulled all the way down over his head. Oh, you'll do great, Tamaki. Tagata quickly moves over to his friend, giving him a few soft strokes down his back. How do you know how long the interviews will be? Some of the third years I talked to said that theirs were 5 minutes each. Wordlessly, Aizawa holds a sheet of paper aloft. Hato immediately rushes forth and plucks it from his fingers, skimming it over in an instant. This has the contents of the tests, she exclaims. Then when everyone rushes over to look at it with her, it's all vague, though. The rescue part is first, then combat. The expected pass rate is 6 to 5%. They don't even tell us how we'll be graded. That's the commission for you. Aizawa mutters unkindly. Vague and unhelpful is their trademark.
True. We seen that My Hero anime and how fucking horrible the image, how bad the commission is. Like I know members A, there may not be much in the military, but they could send them in the military for fuck's sake. I know they're very fucking unhelpful as hell.
Take it easy with the bad mouthing. Eraser. Mike snickers. You got 4 hero hopefuls and me in the room. And after all, they sign your paycheck. Aizawa looks about ready to tell Mike where exactly the hero commission can shove their paycheck, but there's a knock at the door. Short, sharp, and polite raps draw everyone's attention. Enter, Aizawa says, standing up. Mike does the same. The door, which is a warm, dark wood, swings open silently, and walks a skinny, middle-aged woman in the highest pair of heels Izuku has ever seen, and even in those she's still barely the same height as Hato. She sniffs when she sees everyone looking at her, straightening her suit and skirt, which looked like they were pressed while she was wearing them. You are correct, Aizawa grunts at her words. Exceptional. Interviews are first. Is there an Amajiki Tamaki? H here. Amajiki stutters, being gently pushed forward by his friends. The woman gives him a once-over and lets out an unimpressed huff. Follow me, the woman says, turning around and walking out of the room. She doesn't even look back to see if Amajiki is behind her, which he isn't. It takes a couple quick hugs and more than a couple words of encouragement before he leaves scampered footsteps starting after the sharp stabs of the woman's heels. The waiting after that is tense. Everyone knows that Amajiki was probably the worst pick out of them for who went first. By all accounts, it should have been Nagata or Hato, but either because the names were selected alphabetically or out of bad luck, he is to go into the interview blind. I hope he's doing all right, Tagata says word. He started pacing the floor the instant he couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. Hato and Izuku settle for watching him from a pair of armchairs, but they're also really tense. He'll be okay, yeah, Hato says, though there's not much cheer to it. Tamaki's strong, he'll pull through. Public relations are an illogical thing to put in this test anyways, Aizawa says from his spot on the couch. Not all heroes do stuff like that. If the test makers are logical, they'll make it so that the interviews aren't worth many points. I just wish we could have picked the order. Tagata says, uncharacteristically frustrated. I would have volunteered to go first. That was probably intentional, Izuku says mostly to himself. If they did that, then they'd lose some genuine reactions. The people who went first would probably be like you, Tagata. They could share what happened in the interview, and the people who waited would have time to plan their responses. From their standpoint, going in a random or alphabetic order is the only way to avoid that. Tagata sighs. That doesn't mean I have to be happy about it. Yet a silence blankets the room, no one in even a remotely good enough mood to talk. Izuku watches the second hand on the clock, counting the ticks as the red line gradually moves around. It's hard. His mind is going a million miles an hour, mostly worried for Amajiki, but also planning out all sorts of things he could do in the practical test. He's definitely more of a combat-based hero than a rescue one, but private lessons with 13 were good for something. A lot of things, in fact. And with this belt of first aid supplies, he should be able to help out in almost any situation. But then there's combat. One for all at 24% is strong, but even then there are limitations. What if he can't use his higher power levels? What if he can't get within striking range? His air forces aren't good outside of a 10 to 20 meter range, and Black Whip and Float can only move him around so fast. It would only take a bit of bad luck for him to get pinned down by long-range fighters, if there are any fighters. It could just be robots, after all, or anything, really. The possibilities are endless because if they can afford a massive place like this for people to take a test in, then who knows what else they could afford. The door swings open again right when Izuku starts to visualize different fights. An exhausted-looking Amajiki hurries in and sits down in his own chair, Tagata rushing to his side. Hado Nejar, the woman says, looking around. Izuku gets the impression that she's not particularly happy about how the interview went, if she even saw the interview. That's me, Hado says, getting up. She casts a look at Amajiki, who's breathing deeply, then one at Izuku. He mouths a quick good luck before she nods and turns to the woman. Where to, ma'am? Down the hall. Let's not be late, shall we? Izuku doesn't watch them leave. Instead, he moves to Amajiki's side, kneeling opposite Tagata. The shy boy looks more than a little shaken up, with slouched shoulders and clenched fists. Tagata's rambling off encouraging things while gesturing wildly and making lots of terrible jokes. What happened? Izuku asks gently. Amajiki draws a shaky breath. I choked is what happened, he mumbles. It was just me and the interviewer, and I still couldn't get a word out. Why am I like this? There's nothing wrong with you, Tamaki, Tagata soothes, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. You're just a little people shy. There's nothing wrong with that. Interviews aren't necessary for heroes. I know Aizawa doesn't do them, and we should all be thankful for that. President Mike snarks before cursing at an elbow to his ribs. But I don't want to be like this, Amajiki mutters. It's probably the angriest Izuku's seen him, and it's the kind of anger he understands best. Self-loathing. I want to choose to not do interviews or small talk because I don't feel like it. Not this. He gestures to himself and sighs. It's okay to fail, Izuku says as soft as he can manage. There's nothing wrong with not succeeding at something just as long as you learn from it. We get better because of our mistakes, right? So the more we make, the better we get, which means you'll be really good at all of this socializing stuff one day. There's silence for a little bit. Amajiki and Tagata are hard to read. Then that was super cheesy. Tagata snickers, covering his mouth with a gloved hand. Izuku would normally be really embarrassed, but the fact that Amajiki's laughing too helps dull that feeling. Like you're one to talk, Izuku says, defending himself. What you said was no less cheesy. Yeah, but Tagata starts. He can't keep it together and keeps on laughing, Izuku and Amajiki joining in. They calm down eventually, and just in the nick of time as well because Hado comes back much sooner than expected. The blue-haired girl confidently strides in, not even bothering to knock on the door before she opens it. I'm pretty sure I nailed it, she says, completely ignoring the stern woman behind her. You guys do anything interesting while I was gone? Nope. Cool. Anyways, the whole thing is, we'd best keep this going. The woman interrupts, stepping forward and placing her foot on the ground harder than usual to make a sharp crack. There's only so much time before the practical begins. Midori Izuku, you're up next. Izuku stands and starts to follow the woman out, but he's stopped by a hand around his wrist. Looking back over his shoulder, he sees his friends smiling. They all wish him good luck before letting him go, but not without a couple fond pats on the back. The walk down the hall is silent and almost suffocating. The woman faces perfectly forward and walks in a perfectly straight line with perfect posture and perfect decorum. Despite her prim and proper outward appearance, though, Izuku still gets the feeling that she doesn't like him or what she has to do. At the end of the hall is a metallic, hingeless door with a big blue circle in the center of it. The woman knocks on the door 3 times, each rap sharp and short. Instantly, the door slides up into somewhere, revealing a room. Well, what are you waiting for? The woman sniffs. Go in. With a deep breath, Izuku crosses the threshold and takes the room in as the door shuts behind him. It looks like a small movie set with 2 fake movable walls on the far side of the room and an expensive-looking camera in the center of the floor. Everything is well lit, and the fake room the 2 walls make is modeled like the inside of a conference room with a table and office chairs. Midoriya Izuku is it? A jovial voice says, echoing off the walls. Izuku turns to see a big mustached man, perhaps 7 feet tall, with an obvious beer belly and a cheap-looking tweed suit. Yes, sir, that's me, Izuku answers. His hand twitches. Should he extend it for a handshake? Or is a bow more appropriate? Excellent, excellent, the man says, producing a clipboard from the inner breast pocket of his suit along with a small TV remote. Come sit, don't be shy. I'm not here to hurt you. He walks over to the fake walls and plops himself down in one of the chairs. It's much too small for him, and he practically spills out of it, but the sturdy thing holds firm. Izuku follows and takes his own seat, across from the man but parallel to the table. So, Deku. The man starts setting his clipboard on the table and drawing a pen. He clicks a button on the remote, and an audible beep comes from the camera. On it, a red LED light turns on. What kind of hero are you? Oh, Izuku says, caught off guard. Is that? He trails off, catching the slight impatience in the man's eyes. Right, okay. I'm more of a combat and villain apprehension type of hero. I do know my way around a rescue, but I tend to focus on combat more. Interesting. The man makes a small mark on his clipboard, and you go to UA, right? What's that like? Really, really nice. Izuku smiles at the thought of his school. The faculty is really great, there's a lot of resources, and the people are amazing. I know I've really learned a lot there. What year are you in? My first, Izuku answers. I guess I'm taking this a bit earlier than what my teachers had planned, but I think that's a good thing. Haha. The man nods, scribbling something on his notes. I see you've got some interesting parts on your costume. Did you lose one of your boots and one of your gloves? No, the mismatching is actually intentional, Izuku explains. People's eyes are drawn to bright colors, so if I bait someone with my white glove or boot, then I can get a surprise hit with the black ones. The man raises an eyebrow and makes a heavy mark with his pen. That's smart of you, he says. Are you a smart hero? I'd like to think so, but I'm still just a freshman. Izuku stutters. I like to overthink a lot, which might make it seem like I'm smart, but, well, I'm not really. Yeah, well, I'm sure you'll learn and grow throughout your academic career. He checks his watch. What's your quirk? Superpower. Izuku rattles off. And the second aspect is called Dark Tendrils. I was lucky enough to be born with a dual-type quirk. Oh, and I can fly. What about special moves? You got any? Yeah, a couple, Izuku says, then flushes. They're mostly based on or inspired by All Mights, but I've got a few of my own. Well, that's something I'd love to hear more about, Deku. The man says, turning over a leaf of paper to cover whatever he's written down, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Goodbye. Izuku blinks. That's it. The man looks at him fondly. It is unless you want to miss out on the more important portions of the test. With that, Izuku leaves the room, escorted by the stern woman all the way down the hall. This time, though, the woman walks behind him, eyes drilling into the back of his skull and making the minute hairs on his neck stand on end. It's uncomfortable, but the walk is short, so he forces himself to deal with it and keeps moving. When Izuku walks back into the sitting room, he finds that Tagata isn't there with everyone else. He looks over his shoulder to see if the woman knows where he is, but she'd left the moment he entered the room. Shrugging the thought off, he walks further in and takes a seat. Immediately, Hato moves over to him. How did it go? She asks, leaning forward curiously. Her hair is long enough that it nearly brushes the floor. Fine, he answers. It went by quickly, and there weren't that many questions. I'm not sure how well I did, though. Where's Tagata? Another office lady came by and picked him up. Hato informs, said that they wanted to speed up the process and do more than one at once. He should be back soon if his interview is as short as yours. What did the guy ask you about? Surface level stuff, Izuku says, thinking back. Nothing too interesting, but somehow I still get the impression that I answered wrong at least once. I think that's on purpose. Hato draws up a chair and takes a seat. I'd everything planned out from the start, and he still sounded more than a little condescending. Maybe it's their way of keeping us in the dark until the end of this. Or maybe they're being mean and it's a practical joke. I can't really see a government agency doing pranks, though. The first one makes the most sense. Izuku nods. When we take tests, they don't tell us our scores until after they are done right. It's probably the same thing here. Probably, Hato huffs. But that's so boring. They show. I'm back, guys. Tagata bursts through the doors, tailed by another woman dressed identically to the first, though slightly taller. Are we ready to head over to the briefing? Is the briefing room even open? President Mike asks, shutting off his phone. It is, the woman answers. Though we don't know how long it will be until the start of the practical. You're free to go there now. Aizawa nods and stands. He gestures for everyone to follow him before walking out of the door. It takes ages to go from their sitting room to the briefing area because if the building could even be called a building. The thing feels way too massive for that is big on the inside. It's much more so internally. As they walk, workers, what must be observers for the exam rush by in golf carts, and many hero schools are there, too. The most notable is Shiksu, the only school to be called Udate's equal. Everyone from that school looks serious, with dark hero outfits with matching hats and stern expressions. Everything about them, including how numerous they are, is the opposite of Izuku's group. There are other schools, too. Ketsubetsu is definitely prominent, with lots of basic costumes and smiling faces. Izuku's heard a lot about that school online, most of it critical and not exactly nice. The UA for screw-ups is what one post called it, which is just completely unfair. Lots of good heroes went to Ketsubetsu, and the school itself is known for its ability to churn out large classes of good heroes every year. Aizawa and President Mike are not allowed in the briefing room. Instead, they're led away with all of the other teachers to watch from the stands while the students themselves are packed into a large cubic room with metallic walls and a large stage in the front. For a while, nothing really happens. People talk among themselves, Tagata makes dumb jokes, Amajiki hides in his cape. All the normal stuff, really. But then, out of nowhere, a loud tapping is played through the sound system. Hello, hello, a calm voice says, followed by more tapping. Izuku, along with everyone else in the room, looks up to the stage to see a thin man in a suit holding a clipboard standing at the podium on the stage. Good, I've got your attention. Welcome to the first provisional licensing exam of the year. Today will probably be one of the more important ones in your life, so you best listen up. As you all know, this test is split into two sections, rescue and combat. Rescue is first. It will be graded individually, and there's no restrictions other than hurting other test takers, of course. The prompt for the rescue portion is as follows. The man clears his throat and straightens his papers. He begins to explain a mountain in an isolated part of the country has had an avalanche. The nearest city and surrounding villages have been affected greatly, experiencing a power outage and several collapsed buildings. Behind him, the wall, which must be some kind of screen, flicks on. It shows a basic map of a city at the base of a mountain with several other smaller settlements. To the south of the mountain is a bit of flat land with a small lake.
Remember, if you like favorite channel, type in name, goodbye.